Hey everyone, this is Greg with the Definitive Mac Upgrade Guide, and today I'm going to be talking about the fate of the Classic Mac Pro. This is going to be one of those talking head style YouTube videos. Not going to be much in the way of fancy graphics, so you can go ahead and minimize this window now, maybe put at 1.25x and listen to this as if it were a podcast. I'm going to splice in some unrelated video so you're just not looking at me in this unfinished garage, as it's kind of embarrassing, but this is going to be my new workspace. So without going too much further, I'm going to be drinking this West Coast style IPA from Breakside. Not a big IPA drinker myself, but I figure it goes with the topic because it's a little weird and it's not my favorite topic. Burp. I shouldn't drink beer while I do this. I've switched up to a better microphone and now I'm drinking a little more top shelf. Where was I? Oh, right. I wanted to talk about why I think the era of the Classic Mac Pro is over. This might be a no-brainer topic for some people, but for others, they might disagree. But these are my thoughts. This isn't to say the Classic Mac Pro is not useful, but there's some big reasons why, moving forward, I just don't know if it's worth investing more money into a Classic Mac Pro setup. So, let's start with my first point. Big Sur macOS 11.2.3 seems to be the limit for the Classic Mac Pro, at least at this juncture. Right now, you use OpenCore, which is an open source bootloader to boot Big Sur and Catalina. This had the effect of also enabling features like the boot screen, enabling hardware video acceleration, and other features you would miss out on, like native updates if you use something like DOSDude instead. Even with all the miracles of OpenCore, we're not able to run past 11.2.3 reliably. You can install it, but eventually you'll get kernel panics, and then the boot drive will become unbootable. What is known about the Big Sur changes is it changes the way the PCIe bus is handled, and thus causes kernel panics. It's not just limited to NVMe like originally thought. This affects everything about macOS. Eventually you'll end up with a non-bootable drive. This is obviously a bad thing. And it doesn't look like the next macOS will solve this. Number 2 is kind of in the similar vein as the last one. Windows 11 requires Trusted Platform Module, or better known as cMP 2.0. It's still installable, but now you're entering a Hackintosh-like state for even Windows 11. This means that at some point in the future, perhaps, Windows 11, maybe at the final release, maybe never, but still maybe might not be bootable. So that also limits the Classic Mac Pro even on the Windows side, which historically Windows has supported hardware for a lot longer than Mac OS. There's a lot of confusion around this, as there should be, because Microsoft promised Windows 10 would be the last Windows, but here we are with Windows 11. This also has the effect of undoing one of the best things about Windows, which is very long-term support. To circle back to TPM 2.0, it requires a 8th generation Intel CPU or a Zen 2 AMD CPU, although I believe the 7th generation Intel CPUs are supported. This leaves a lot of Mac users in the dark as well, because obviously the 2010 Mac Pro is not a 7th generation. My third point is the GPU crisis and the lack of modern graphics card support for the Classic Mac Pros. This is because Apple ties its GPU drivers to the OS release. This is an infuriating design flaw, but it works for Apple, but not for end users. It's unlikely we'll ever see the Classic Mac Pros run 6000 series GPUs, or at least not without some serious open-core wizardry. Then also on top of this GPU crisis, old graphics cards are just absurdly expensive. And they're coming down slowly, but surely, so used cards are still not in a great place, which further accelerates the timeline for the Classic Mac Pro. It just doesn't make sense to buy a used graphics card or a used Classic Mac Pro that you can't stick a very good graphics card for not a lot of money into. If this was normal times instead of the end of days, I would expect a Radeon 5700 XT to be like $200. And at that case, that might make the Classic Mac Pro more of a good value proposition. But right now, the type of GPUs people are selling classic Mac Pros with are not very good and will get absolutely trounced by the Apple Silicon. And for the fourth and probably the biggest one, the one that everyone's thinking about is Apple Silicon. Right now, the M1 isn't perfect. It certainly has its limitations, but for a lot of people, this is a huge upgrade, even over the classic Mac Pro, depending on what kind of workflow you have. Yes, there's a lack of RAM. Yes, the RAM is shared with the VRAM, further stressing the lack of RAM. And yeah, you only can have only one external display on the laptops or two with the Mac Mini. And the GPU, while very good for iGPU, aka a integrated GPU, is also bad when compared to dedicated GPUs. Dedicated being like an AMD chipset, one that isn't part of the CPU itself. The Mac Mini is pretty great in a lot of workflows. If you've seen the benchmarks, I suggest you check them out. But as an M1 owner, I also found the hard edges, and the hard edges can be kind of rough. That said, I edit my videos on my M1, or at least I did until I got a 2019 Mac Pro, which brings me to the second part of this. If you have the money, the 2019 Mac Pro is amazing. The Mac Pro 2019, aka the 7.1, is such a big upgrade, and I'm probably going to do a video on it to explain why it's such a monumental upgrade, even though it's quite obvious for a classic Mac Pro user. With all that said, it is extremely price prohibitive, and I get that. But Apple does give you a vector if you need dedicated GPUs or a hell of a lot of RAM. To circle back to the Apple Silicon, this is a very Captain Obvious argument, and you've heard this one before, but I have to say it because it is true. The next round of computers are going to be the ones you want. The current computers are the consumer computers. These are not aimed at working professionals, which is a significant amount of the people who watch my videos or read my guides. So if you are right now a UX developer like myself or a web developer, which is me too, the M1 is already so good. If you put any stock into the current rumors, which there's quite a bit, it really sounds like Apple's addressing all the major criticisms. That's being like the RAM, the amount of I/O ports, and even the amount of displays and the GPU. For a lot of people, this is going to be the one, especially people working in the 2D fields that are not video editing. If you're a creative professional who spends their lives in, say, the Adobe Suite with Photoshop or Illustrator or Sketch or Figma, or even worse, the sad souls that have to use Adobe XD. For video editors and motion graphics guys, this is not going to be the most amazing computer, but it's going to be the best laptop on the market, most likely. It'll probably best your classic Mac Pro too. This brings me back to the conclusion for this video. I personally read the tea leaves and sold my classic Mac Pros. Well, all but one, my original 2008 that I bought back in 2008. I had two 5.1s, a dual CPU 2010 and a single CPU 5.1. I pulled the GPUs and put in really crappy GPUs, and I still managed to sell the 5.1 for pretty much what I paid for it back. I think it was about 4 years ago now at this point. So I sold a dual CPU computer for about $800 when I bought it for about $800. The GPUs, on the other hand, sold for a lot more money. The Radeon 7, oh my god, that one sold for a lot. And the Vega 56 sold for as much as the dual CPU computer. All said and done, that put me only a few hundred short of a base 2019. Even with the weaker GPU than the Radeon 7, the base 2019 Mac Pro is just such a nicer computer. I personally just didn't think I was ever going to buy a 2019 Mac Pro, even though I secretly really wanted one. I could have afforded one, but I have a lot of other expenses. At the beginning of the video, you saw this wonderful garage I'm in. Yeah, that's coming out of my pockets because apparently in the future, nobody works from an office anymore. My current advice for classic Mac Pro owners is to save your money if possible. Yes, do those few upgrades that can keep you going for another year or two. Inevitably, Apple Silicon is the future, but maybe you can save enough money for one of the 7.1s or the inevitable 8.1. If not, then the Apple Silicon is still going to be a lot faster than your classic Mac Pro for work. For games, that's going to be a little different, but that's an entirely different topic and not the topic for this video. So my friends, as I sit drinking alone in an unfinished garage somewhere out in southeast Portland, I wanted to toast to the classic Mac Pro because it's been a long ride and it's been fantastic, but I'm moving on. This is not to say the classic Mac Pro upgrade guide is going anywhere. In fact, it'll continue to be updated, continue to be free to use, and continue to have the latest information as it percolates out from the Mac Pro community. It's just now, from here on, my focus is going to be on the 2019 Mac Pro and other things that are geeky you can do with Macs. This has always been my intention, and we all knew this would happen one day, is this is how technology works. It gets old, we upgrade it, we replace it with something better. So I hope you guys enjoyed my videos on the classic Mac Pros. I'll have some more. Probably, I don't want to overpromise, and this is not my usual video style because, as you can see, my life is in transition back to normalcy. I grew up in small town southern Oregon coast in an area that's probably smaller than where you grew up, in a town called Bandon. So if you ever have a chance and you're driving through, stop at Bandon Rain Unique Craft Ciders. If you notice, I'm always drinking beer in my videos, and that's a salute to all the people who work in the craft beverage industry, because these are my homies, and these are the things that are part of my Oregonian culture. I suggest you check out Bandon Rain because they make wonderful cranberry cider, and I think you would enjoy it. It's my brother and my sister-in-law, and they do a kick-ass job. I got to play bartender during COVID. That was pretty kick-ass. And I hope you guys are returning to normalcy, and you're vaccinated, and wherever you are, things are starting to look up. They are over here, and I'm about done with this beer, so toast.